Back in the faraway era called the 1990s, there was one computer game genre that ruled supreme over all others: the graphic adventure game. The 1990s truly was the golden era of this genre, and most of the best titles were released during this time. The two companies that reigned supreme in this style of game were LucasArts Entertainment and Sierra Online. While LucasArts relied on quirky and player-friendly titles like Sam & Max, Day of the Tentacle, and Full Throttle, Sierra's games were more challenging, punishing players for the slightest mistake, and sometimes had borderline cryptic puzzles, but they too had their own, often quite dark sense of humor. Another difference was that beyond the Monkey Island series, LucasArts games tended to be of the one-off variety, whereas Sierra, who admittedly had been involved with the genre much longer, had sequels up the ass. There were 8 King's Quest, the 6 Leisure Suit Larry games 1 through 7, 6 Space Quests, 4 Police Quests, and a Partridge in a Pear Tree. However, one series stood out amongst the rest, and that's the one I'll be talking about today, the Gabriel Knight series. With only 3 titles to its name, released throughout the 1990s, it's the shortest Sierra adventure game series out there, but I say quality over quantity. This is easily one of the best adventure game series out there. The games were written by Jane Jensen, who got her start with King's Quest VI, which solidified her reputation. We'll now take a look at each of the Gabriel Knight games, reviewing them as I go along. The first title was released in 1993. In the game, you're Gabriel Knight, a down-on-his-luck novelist from New Orleans. You're trying to write a murder mystery novel, drawing your inspiration from a series of real voodoo-related serial killings and using your old buddy, Detective Frank Mosley, as your personal source for inside information. As the story progresses, you fall in love with the wealthy New Orleans socialite Malia Getty, discover that you actually come from a family of ancient evil vanquishers called the Schattenjägers, and that an evil voodoo cult wants you dead, since Malia is possessed by the dead spirit of a voodoo queen your great-granduncle had to fling with and then watch burn at the stake. The outstanding feature of the first Gabriel Knight game is definitely its story, particularly the way it combines actual history with a fictional story and tells it in a private dick style. So in a way, it's like the Broken Sword games, but with a lot more sex and gore. My only problem with the game is the romance between Gabriel and Malia, which is just pulpy as hell. It's not too bad, but it just happens way too fast and feels like it came from a bad romantic novel. One area where this game has definitely not aged well is the graphics, but still, there's a lot of production value with intricate background designs and highly detailed character animation. My favorite parts are the cutscenes made of scanned comic book art. These still look fantastic in my view. And on top of that, the voice cast is practically star-studded. Firstly, there's Tim Curry as Gabriel Knight, who is brilliant.
But your eyes are really distracting. I don't think I've ever seen a color quite like that brownish gold. It's so deep and rich. Man, if I could bottle that, I'd make a fortune.
Mark Luke Skywalker Hamill is playing Mosley.
It's going. Can't seem to make any progress, though. Sluggish damn cases. Weird.
And even Michael Dorn from Star Trek The Next Generation makes an appearance.
Many people think of voodoo in terms of magic spells or greenery. That kind of practice is actually called hoodoo.
And for adventure game nerds everywhere, Malia Getty is voiced by Leilani Jones, better known as the voice actress of the Voodoo Lady in the Monkey Island series. And her possessor, the Voodoo Queen Tetelo, is voiced by the late Linda Gary, remembered for her countless voice roles on He-Man and She-Ra. Even Jim Cummings is in this game. As for the gameplay, it's traditional Sierra adventure game stock. There's many occasions where you can get killed, but I'd say it's still more fair than in a lot of other Sierra games. The puzzles are also designed really well, but there are a lot of small puzzles that you can easily miss. It's also easy to get stuck because you forgot to do something seemingly insignificant, like pick up a handful of clay on the beach where one of the killings happens. Often these minor puzzles are easy to miss because the game doesn't tell you directly that you have to complete them, and it's only once you notice that you've done everything, yet day 4 never seems to end, that you may have missed something. This is at least one aspect where I think the sequels have improved a lot. But at the same time, I can see why many Gabriel Knight fans consider it the best game in the series. You just have to be prepared to click on pretty much everything on every screen when you play the game. But here's a little trick for first-time players. Go into the options menu and crank the speed dial all the way up. There you go. Overall, Sins of the Fathers is still a worthwhile title after all these years thanks to its excellent writing and fascinating locations. It holds up well despite some of its more archaic features, like a menu bar that takes up half the frickin' screen, and is definitely worth playing. The sequel, The Beast Within, was released in 1996 and picks up a year after the events of the last game. Gabriel is now living in his ancestral home of Schloss Ritter in South Germany. Your hair has grown out and the local townspeople... Hold up, is that Cake Cuter?
This is not the first such killing. And if it is not stopped, it will not be the last.
It is! It is Cake Cuter! Anyway... They want you to investigate the killing of a little girl near Munich where they believe the villain to be a
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
Werewolf.
While Gabriel heads to Munich to hobnob with the socialite hunting club and discovering an illegal animal smuggling ring, your loyal assistant Grace leaves the bookshop in New Orleans to follow up on a lead of a werewolf trial in Schloss Ritter and the possible connection to King Ludwig II and Wagnerian opera.
How exciting!
Now, the first thing you'll notice is that this game runs on full motion video, which is to say that every character is played by a live actor and you're going to be watching a lot of cutscenes. This may already be a deal breaker for many, but for me personally, it's what makes this game brilliant. The acting is so cheesy and over the top, I just laugh.
All right. I'll see you at the station later.
How do you say, quid pro quo in German?
There is no translation.
Who are you? I was just wondering the same thing, dear.
These are my favorite characters, the Smiths. They seem like a throwaway gag couple, but they actually play a vital role in the game, and that's just awesome.
Oh, we're demonologists.
The plot is almost as good as the last game's, but probably because of all the live footage they had to shoot for it, it's structured a bit more like a movie, and it's very top-heavy. Meaning that almost all the really interesting stuff happens in the last 3 of the game's 6 chapters. That's one downer about this one. It's easily the shortest of the games. Meanwhile, while the FMV heaviness of this game does put a lot of limitations on it, it's still a really well done adventure game. The puzzles are still challenging in a good way, and at least the cursor now reacts to interactive hotspots when you hover over them. The graphics of this one have also aged rather poorly, and unfortunately the fact that there's a real people imposed on blue screen to real photographs does make it rather messy. But you have to remember that for the time, this was really cutting edge, and it is a lot more cleaner and well done than most other games of this sort. My only complaint is that sometimes relevant items are placed in a way that I still tend to miss them, because they're somewhere in a corner where I forget to look, but it's nowhere near as bad as the first game. Also, this game has a hint button, which tells you when you still have something to do at a certain location. The only thing that sucks is that you pretty much have to use up every dialogue option and click on everything to progress, whereas there was a bit more freedom in the last game. What's cool though is that this time you also get to play as Grace, and you also get to do a lot of research and stuff, which is kinda neat. However, they kinda fucked it up with the new Schwanstein part, because in order to get all the clues, you have to listen to the guide tape on everything, or else you will never finish this part of the game. But at the same time, the interface is a lot less cluttered and a lot more self-explanatory than in the last game. You can skip cutscenes just by clicking the mouse, which is also really handy. In addition, this may also be the only game besides Final Fantasy VI that I know of which had an entire opera composed just for the story, and that alone is an applaud-worthy achievement. In all, and despite his best efforts, Dean Erickson is no substitute for Tim Curry.
Here, Wolf. Come on, Wolf. Come on. Come on. It's like that, is it?
But if you're willing to forgive this game's technical limitations, it's still a very good adventure game with a really good story. Finally, Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned. Well, after taking on a voodoo cult and werewolves, what could possibly be next for Gabe? Vampires? You got it. Specifically, an evil cult of vampires who kidnapped the infant son of Prince James of Albany. Gabriel is knocked out following the kidnappers and winds up in the small French town of Rennes-le-Château. You meet your old buddy Mosley, find out there's a treasure hunting tour group staying at the hotel, and start hunting for clues. The third installment of the series is now in full-on 3D, which means that each Gabriel Knight game has utilized a completely different art style. Old-school adventure game fans in particular tend to have a lot of reservations when it comes to 3D adventure games, but after playing Gabriel Knight 3, I'm rather surprised more games didn't jump into the third dimension. The game has a completely free-moving camera, which allows you to inspect objects from a variety of angles, and this makes the environment feel more interactive than in either of the previous games. In this one, both Gabe and Grace can also teleport behind the camera if they're out of view, so you don't have to watch them walk across the screen like in the first game. In addition, this game has probably the best structure of any of the games, where each of the game's days is divided into smaller time blocks, in which everything happens. There are a number of obligatory objectives you have to complete in order to progress, like before, but as a massive improvement to the first game, all the secondary objectives in the game are more of an extra addition for you to discover when you replay the game. So in other words, it's a game that rewards you for perceptiveness, but doesn't punish you if you just want to get on with the story. The game also has probably one of my favorite video game casts of all time. Unlike so many other adventure games, this time the main cast isn't treated as expendable, and instead you get to interact with them a lot. Plus, there's so much fun with their crazy dialogue and over-the-top personalities.
I should have recognized the accent.
What accent?
I'm Estelle Stiles, and this is Lady Lily Howard.
Renowned on stage and screen.
Gabriel Knight. You wanker.
Mosley? Is that you?
I got this big piece of equipment, sir.
Oh, je comprends. However big your equipment, monsieur, I've no doubt seen something very much like it before.
Now, of course, Tim Curry is back voicing Gabe again.
My Schattenjäger dagger.
But I actually find playing as Grace in this game a lot more fun. You still do a lot of research, but this time Sierra made it fun and easy with Grace's laptop, rather than laborious and time-consuming like in the last game. Also, 3 words, Le Serpent Rouge. On top of everything else, the game just has a brilliant atmosphere thanks to the well-rendered actual town of Rennes-le-Château as its setting, and that lovely piano-heavy score by Robert Holmes. The game definitely starts slow, but I love the more gradual build-up of this game compared to the previous one. I also think the historical aspects of the plot this time around are even more interesting than the first game, which explains why I got really hooked on this game the first time I played it, and which is why it's still not just my favorite Gabriel Knight game, but my favorite adventure game as well. In fact, if there's any fault with this game, it's probably that the intro doesn't properly explain the game's backstory, but instead you have to read it from a comic book, which may have come in printed form with the original game, but in the Sierra Bestsellers version was just a PDF tucked away on the first disc, which is to say, I didn't even read it until I had already finished the game. But the game has aged extremely well, and is still a lot of fun. Definitely worth playing for any serious adventure game fans, and so are the rest of them. You can buy all of these games from Good Old Games right now, and I highly recommend it. That's all for me for now. I'm TheHande. See you on the next one.